New Brunswick, New Jersey, home of the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, Johnson & Johnson headquarters, and arguably New Jersey's worst parking environment. When it comes to parking policy, everyone has questions but few people have the answers. Developers often chafe against the requirements for cutting into their bottom line, but for residents and business owners alike, it often seems like no amount of parking is ever enough. Faced with such an impasse, it's natural for people to turn to city planners for their help. After all, we're supposed to be the experts on this sort of thing. Truth is, though, we don't know the perfect number of parking spaces any more than anyone else does, but by dividing the issue into sections to analyze them one by one, we can get a clearer picture of the kinds of policies cities should be implementing.
Let's start this analysis on where minimum parking requirements come from. Parking minimums begin with good intentions. They're aimed at preventing cars from spilling over into the streets due to shortages. When it comes to actually forming them, though, it's not as precise a science as you'd like. Many towns and cities just guess at a number, and many more simply copy requirements from neighboring towns. Some towns will try to be more scientific, using observational data by groups such as the Institute of Transportation Engineers. ITE's methods have serious problems, however. There's a bias towards observing suburban strip malls during peak hours, even though their recommendations are written for all types of cities and all times of day. As well, anyone can submit parking data to them, and in many cases, conclusions about parking requirements will be drawn from just a small handful of observations.
Not only are high minimum parking requirements unreliable predictors of parking demand, they're also enormously expensive. In 2012, research by the University of California found that it costs an average of $24,000 to build a single above-ground parking space in the United States, and $34,000 to build the same parking space underground. These costs get passed on to the public in the form of higher housing prices and rents for residences, as well as more expensive goods and services for consumers. Aside from monetary costs, new research by the State Smart Transportation Initiative and the University of Connecticut suggests that excessive parking leads to more driving and traffic. Increase in parking requirements made decades ago are strongly correlated with car use in the present day. This correlation is found consistently across space and time, such that it basically doesn't matter if you're a small town or a big city. More parking is likely to cause more driving. Aside from the increase in total driving, with low cost or free parking, people will be willing to cruise for longer periods of time for parking. This addition of cruising cars adds unnecessary pollution and increases congestion.
Parking can be reformed, however, and we've seen it in practice. Since much of the demand for parking is due to parking being free, one approach successfully implemented in San Francisco is to charge dynamic prices based on location and time of day. This has the added benefit of reducing added traffic from cruising around for a parking spot, which in some cities can amount to nearly a third of their traffic congestion. Another approach, seen in the City of London, is to flip parking requirements on their head, having no minimum requirements, but instead having a maximum. This gives developers much more flexibility to find the right amount of parking for projects on their own, saving valuable urban real estate and reducing the amount of deadweight lost in excess parking that would then be passed on to consumers as higher prices.
Effective parking doesn't depend on planners and other experts coming up with perfect numbers, but instead on creating policies and processes that incentivize people to make the right choices for their needs. Demand for parking is always going to be a complex, imprecise figure with the major economic and equity risk for writing the wrong solutions into law. By reforming parking requirements and practices to better respond to economic incentives, cities will be that much closer to achieving the best outcomes for all members of their communities.